they die before they get the chance to become addicts. It's that dangerous. It's a Russian roulette when you grab those things. You have no idea what you're taking when you take a pill that's been produced by the cartels.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
God bless America. Welcome to The Ranch, everybody. The podcast explores the people and happenings of Dry Creek Ranch, Eagle, and the greater Boise area. Today's episode was fantastic. One of these that really sets the stage for a large series with this individual. I couldn't be happier. And a quick shout out to our partner with these episodes, New Gen Wellness Center. This is a facility focused on mental and physical wellness. They have lots of crisis stabilization programs, detox facilities. They don't believe that medication is always the answer. They focus extensively on an integrative approach to mental and physical well-being. They're fantastic. If you know somebody struggling, needing help with substance abuse, detox, any kind of mental health, reach out to New Gen Wellness Center. That's newgenwellnesscenter.com. My guest today is a state legislator in the 14th District. That's right here in Eagle. He is a retired Navy pilot and wholly committed to bringing change to Idaho. We spoke at length about the fentanyl crisis that Idaho is experiencing, as well as immigration reform and a number of other bills that he's trying to bring forward. But I will let you hear from him. Without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, Ted Hill. First off, thank you for coming, sir.
Yes, sir.
You've been sponsoring a ton of bills. You've been working extensively with this, traveling, working with the Idaho State Police Force, sending people around for specialty training. Give me, if you don't mind, give me the background on what brought you to this, right? What did you know this was a problem going into the job?
No.
Okay, so take me from the beginning. We have as much time as you need.
I think I started to learn, my nephew died of a fentanyl overdose 2016.
I'm sorry.
I was aware of that, so that got me some attention. But initially I got started with when I was looking at the border, what was happening down there, and Governor Abbott was asking for help. Hey, we need help from the Guard to come down and help us secure this border. And I went and asked the governor. I went to a letter directly from me as a representative of the governor. I want us to send Guard down there. How can we do this? He gave me an audience. We sat down with him. We got the general and we got all the leadership, and we discussed that. Can we send our Guard down there to actually help that mission? And that's when it kind of opened up the can of worms. Well, it came the reality that it wasn't a really good mission for us. What the Guard is doing down there is just pretty much just moving concertina wire and moving heads and being basically an administration force. Our Guard is a combat force. So under the ROE, it didn't make sense. So we said, no, we're not going to send the Guard. That opened up the fentanyl thing. And then we started talking about fentanyl. He said, well, we need to have a roundtable to discuss what the fentanyl and trafficking is doing. So we had another roundtable with the governor and the Idaho State Police and me and a couple other leaders. And we talked about the fentanyl risk. So that kind of helped me out. I showed a lot of interest in this, and they kind of threw it my way. What's going on down there is pretty serious. I know it was 110,000 people died last year to fentanyl overdoses. And it's the number one killer between 18 and 45 for young men. So that is a serious issue to address.
Okay, so what did they tell you after you realized, okay, look, sending the Guard down wouldn't be an appropriate mission. Our forces are not best served, and the specialties and skills not best there.
Right.
What did they tell you, besides obviously the great human casualty rate, but what did they tell you to help you understand, the enemy's not like far away. The enemy's here now. Fentanyl's here now.
Right. Well, I think that I was basically rustling the bushes on this because I poked in there and I was the first one to poke, so I kind of got everyone's attention. Idaho State Police said, hey, this Representative Hill is pushing this. What do we do? And I think that just kind of kicked it off. And he offered me that roundtable because, okay, Representative Hill, now I'm a senior military former officer. I was the right guy to bring this forward. I used to be a force provider when I was a commander. So I understood the mission. I understood the requirements. So I was the right guy to come forward. It wasn't going to happen, but they said, hey, you're interested in this. We can offer you something else. Let's look at this fentanyl issue, and we'll have a roundtable to address that. We brought the Idaho State Police in, and we talked about those issues. And that's when I came to the realization that we needed to come after real decisive laws with mandatory sentencing. And that was one of the bills we tried last year that did not make it. So it worked. I did a lot of work. I talked to some people in Nebraska. They put this mandatory sentence in. It really dropped the trafficking down. And I told you earlier I wanted to learn more about this. I did a border visit at Eagle Pass. I could talk about that for a half hour. I did that last month. Went down to see, that's where Elon Musk was at, if you recall that. 10,000 people came across that particular 6-mile stretch in one day. I got to see the humanitarian crisis and the trafficking crisis. And then that's not the fentanyl crisis. This is two-tiered. You got this human trafficking crisis of all these people. We're seeing it across the country now. Then the fentanyl crisis is coming in the other areas, and what it's doing to our country is devastating. That's when I went down to L.A. and joined the L.A. Sheriff's Department with a bust, early morning bust with 9 simultaneous locations, where we went after fentanyl traffickers to get a feel of what it's like on the street. And you talk to these officers in L.A., they're frustrated because the penalties are literally non-existent. So these people are getting busted. Luckily, the DEA steps in and says, oh, yeah, well, wait, we got federal laws. We're going to hammer you. They come in with the federal laws for 10 years. Suddenly, these guys cave and roll. Now they start to find everybody. It really works. The DEA doesn't have the bandwidth to go after all this, but that kind of decisive law enforcement works. You get these guys, they roll, they're going to give up who's the next guy in the chain, and they start going after them.
Okay. You just hit like 5 things in a row. It's great. So yeah. Let's focus this in.
Peel it back.
Let's go. Help me understand the history of fentanyl in Idaho, because I think a lot of people understand that fentanyl is causing all kinds of problems across the country. But again, I think a lot of people think we're largely insulated from this, and it's my understanding that's not true. So help me understand how fentanyl is getting in, where you're seeing it pop up.
Right.
Is it tied to human trafficking? Are they moving the same thing? And I know that's a separate issue, but help me understand what the average mother and father should understand, or the average 25-year-old should understand that's just trying to get on with life. Where is fentanyl coming from? How is it getting into Idaho? When did it start appearing on the radar?
Okay.
And what are we doing about it? So again, 4 questions. So let's just start with the background.
I'll stop in the beginning. What they described it to me is when marijuana became legalized, the cartels wanted to diversify into something different. So they tried to go into opium, and that's growing poppies. They tried to grow poppies, but it wasn't getting the poppy level they call black tar heroin. It was brown tar heroin. It wasn't good enough. So they found a chemical alternative, which is fentanyl. It is a replacement. It is easier to get in this case, and they found it as a great alternative. Which, since I'm the hardcore anti-China guy, obviously in the last, where do we get this stuff? From China. China is, I would mention this on the floor, they are at war with us in every possible way in every domain. If they can disrupt political, informational, and socially, if they can supplement and actually sabotage our society by providing fentanyl into our country, what a great move. I think it's part what they're doing. They provide these precursors to the cartels, and those cartels take that precursor, make fentanyl, and that's pushed into our country. So understand we have a nation state, which I say the Chinese Communist Party, that we're at war with right now. I say it over and over again. It is warfare by other means. They're fighting in the background, doing everything they can, preparing the battle space, preparing this country. You see it every day. Fentanyl, what a great sabotage, a direct sabotage. They are directly supporting this fentanyl into the cartels and coming up here. That precursor is not easy to get. They can get it from somewhere else. They can get it from India. And if we shut down the Chinese, the Indians will probably back it up. But the Chinese are providing that probably at a discount just to pump this into our country. Look what it's doing to this country. So that is the beginning of how it started to come across. Now, trafficking is the number one moneymaker right now. They're making billions on trafficking human beings, $10,000 to $15,000 to bring someone across. And it's low risk. It's no risk to them. And so fentanyl is risky. And so they usually take that across where there's no guards. They don't go to the regular guard. They're not coming across Eagle Pass where I was. They go to the remote areas, and they can actually bring these things on trucks and come through the port of entry. They can go ahead and smuggle it. And these pills, 2 grams of this stuff will kill a human being. 2 grams. So they make these things in pills down there south of the border. They look like little Oxycontin pills. They just call them U30s. Just like Oxycontin. And we got this one confiscation we did with that raid we did, 50,000 pills we got. And there's these little blue pills, big bags of these things. And you don't know how much is in here. This is the danger the fentanyl is coming across. You don't know about how accurate those pills are. These kids are grabbing. I usually take 2. They take 2. One had 1 gram, and the second one had 1 gram. They die. The thing about fentanyl is super addictive, but it is a Russian roulette on what you're going to get. So yeah, be careful. We got to have information, tell these kids that's the most important, but treatment's not as important because they die before they get the chance to become addicts. It's that dangerous. It's a Russian roulette when you grab those things. You have no idea what you're taking when you take a pill that's been produced by the cartels.
So this podcast is brought to you by mtustudios.com. If you are looking to start a podcast or make content for any level of your business, MTU Studios can help. Just reach out to us today and we can start shooting tomorrow. China's supplying the precursor to this chemical to the cartel. The cartel then takes that, produces fentanyl, and ships it off over the border.
Yes.
How is it making it to Idaho? And because I would assume you have as many consumers as the cartels would need, in Southern California, not to bag on Southern California, but they have an incredible drug problem down there. I mean, you were just down there busting people.
Right.
How is it that it makes it all the way up here, and how is it getting into the state?
I think that obviously demand, if the price is high and it's worth the risk, right now Idaho has pretty strict laws when it comes to trafficking. What the bill I'm trying to get across now is specific to fentanyl trafficking, but they're just bringing it with what we call mules, and the law enforcement down there in California says, don't use that term. Mules is something that's like an animal that's being forced to do something against their will. These guys are not mules. They are traffickers. He says, don't use that term. I go, oh. There said there are traffickers. There are no innocent traffickers. People say, oh, it's grandma. She didn't know. She's carrying 50 pills in her purse. She knew. There's all this stuff, this trafficking thing, you need to come after them hard. And this is where I disagree with the governor a little bit. But he said, I think we need to go after them, hammer them. In the military, was zero tolerance. So you pop positive on a drug test, they kicked you out. Because you know what? They're always guilty every single time. There's no accidental ingestion of cocaine. And there's no accidental trafficking of 50 pills. And that doesn't, I didn't know it was there. No. So whoever was with you, if they snuck it in your stuff, that person's going to be liable. Mandatory sentencing, these bills we're working on, it's pretty serious. 50 pills is a 3-year sentence. Over 250 pills is 5. Over 500 is 10 years. So, yeah, they're going to scare everybody from coming into Idaho. And they can just be people coming across the border, stuffed in their spare tire, wherever they're going to put it. And that's how they bring it up here. And then they get it out into the streets. And it's hard to interdict, really hard to interdict. But when you hammer these guys, I said this to the governor in front of this whole group of people and the Idaho State Police, says, we need to hammer him, sir. And I don't think he necessarily, he's being careful with that because you don't want to be seen as extreme. But in this case, people want action, and it's time to get extreme. It's time to get mean and nasty. Stop playing around with these guys. I'm frustrated as a military person, former military person. Look at the cartels laughing at us, treating our border, beating us around and we seem weak because we are. They're doing whatever they want. They're down there running people, running drugs, doing whatever they want, and we don't do anything to stop it. It appears that it's wide open. I'm frustrated. So you're down in California, and they're doing the best they can. These guys are fighting hard. They feel like we catch these guys, and they walk until the DEA walks in, and then we start coming after them. So we bring the laws down. It requires more in Idaho because you go to Washington, and they're going to do whatever they want. Washington's ridiculous. So if you want to go do drugs, go to Washington. But just don't come to Idaho.
Right. I have heard the argument, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but I have heard the argument that the more you fight the war on drugs, right, the more minimum sentencings you have, the more reaction you have, the riskier it becomes to bring drugs in, which actually makes it a more profitable endeavor. Because then they say, hey, look, getting 50 pills across, this is getting harder and harder and harder. We're losing more and more and more traffickers. That just makes it worth more money.
Yes.
So then you attract people to the area. Do you think that's an accurate representation? Because it's like, hey, now it's not worth $100 a pill. Now it's worth like $1,000 a pill because of how difficult it is to get in.
That's an argument, but that's an argument for someone who wants to lose. I mean, if you want to play that game, just go, I'm just going to roll it. Fentanyl's different. Fentanyl kills people. It's much more dangerous than, say, marijuana. You know, you're not going to overdose on marijuana, but guess what? Marijuana is enhanced with fentanyl. And they enhance this stuff everywhere, so you think you're getting some marijuana or you're getting something else. Fentanyl is like the cyanide of the drug world. It's out there to kill people. And if you don't monitor it, how can you know what you're taking? That's the problem. 110,000 people, you know, and that's a lot of people dying. And we need to come down on it hard. They say, well, let's legalize it. This is different. That is an argument, I would say, of... that's a weak argument. I don't think anybody's going to buy. They can go ahead and play that all day long. It's not going to work. If you come down, it's worked in Nebraska. They put this in there, and their trafficking literally ceased. So what are they going to do if it's hard in Idaho? You know what? You know how many drug traffickers there are in Singapore? 0. You know how much fentanyl there is in Singapore? 0. You know why? They execute you if they catch you. It's all about deterrence. So we're not going to do this. There's no drugs. I go to Singapore. I go over there to China. They don't have that problem at all because they come after them really, really seriously. Well, we're not going to do that. But there's 0, 0, 0 effect. If you put this hardcore and come down on it, it will cease. Are they going to go over into Washington? And that's going to be the point where you can go get drugs? Probably. But if we start to surround ourselves with stricter laws, they always say the war on drugs is a failure. This is different. A little cocaine, you know, and say, okay, that's not killing anybody. This is killing people. Methamphetamines is destructive. If I was the Chinese, and I used to do this as an operational force commander, and I would apply airplanes, submarines, space attack, and all these things that I would get to apply I was the Chinese lead commander. If I wanted to disrupt society like America, what would I do? Put Antifa guys in there to disrupt and cause all kinds of chaos and pump in all this nasty drugs like meth that turns everybody crazy. I was on the streets of LA 3 weeks ago. That's the worst city I've seen in my life. The worst city in the world. LA, worst city in the world. I've been all over the world, you know, short of maybe, you know, Fallujah, but it's just an absolute mess. So this is destructive. Meth and we just got to come down on those two right there. Those two are serious. These overdoses are primarily, the meth is part of that component. And then fentanyl, heroin, and meth are serious problems in this country. And someone tries to apologize for this, absolutely not. You know, if you want to play the weak game, you know, I'm not. And I would suggest that most people in my district want to come down hard on this, and it works.
Right,
we do.
And let's be clear, I don't like that position, which your position is much more favorable to me. The idea that it's like, well, you know, you're just going to make it more attractive. Yeah, fine. Mm-hmm. We'll make it more attractive, but we're going to make it so painful if you get, and again, nobody's advocating for the death penalty, you know, every time here, but if you make it so painful and then there are alternatives, that's just bad business to come into Idaho. If you're a drug trafficker and you realize, hey, if something happens here, it's going to be terrible. We could just go next door somewhere else. And again, Idahoans get to do whatever, Oregonians get to do whatever Oregonians want, or people living in Washington, they get to vote in whatever laws they want. But we have to be worse, right? There's that ridiculous cartoon where it's somebody looking through a scope of a rifle, right? And looking at two bears, and there's one bear there like eating something on the ground, and then it pans over to the next bear, and the bear's looking dead into the scope, saying, pointing at that guy. It's like, just him. You don't want, this is So we have these problems, and they're infiltrating not just the thing that I've been telling. I used to work in education with 16 and 17-year-olds for almost 20 years, and they make bad decisions, right? That's just the way 16 and 17-year-olds are. And one group of them, there's this rugby player that was on this rugby team, and the rugby team was going on some trip to Oregon for this rugby tournament. And of course, being the knuckleheads that they were, somebody's like, hey, because again, you can buy gummies and whatnot very easily in California. They're like, hey, let's take a gummy getting onto the plane. Well, of course, they have no idea how much to take. They have no idea how strong the gummies are. They're not, they just don't understand it. So they pop these gummies. They go to the moon, and they're literally at the gate. Some kid starts like running circles and crying and freaking out. One of the dads grabs one of my students and just grabs him, like, what did you do? And the guy's like cross-eyed. He can't even talk. And it's like, oh God, you idiots. So they yank him off the plane, get out of the airport. And I was sitting down with this kid the week later, and they all got in really big trouble. The rugby dads are not messing around. But I sat him down and said, listen, if you got a beer and you're only 17, so you shouldn't be drinking, but you probably understand that if somebody drinks a Coors Light, they're not going to die, right? And he was like, yeah,
Right.
yeah, okay. I was like, now, you also know that if you drank the same volume of vodka in a Coors Light, that'd be really bad, right? Like, you might die. He's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm like, great. So you understand the difference between beer and vodka for a myriad of reasons. Like, you understand the taste is different. You understand they're packaged differently. There are regulations on these things. All of that makes sense. If you take a pill, you ingest something, or you smoke something, and you don't know where it came from, you don't know what it's laced with, you don't know what train you're getting on, and there is no getting off this train. And you're lucky. The worst thing that happened is somebody cried and ran in circles, because you guys could have been gonzo. Like the number of psychotic breaks that young people have because they think of a little gummy. Like, whatever, I've seen somebody smoke pot, it's not a big, you just ingested 500 milligrams. You're gone for like a month, right?
Really?
Like, I mean, I don't know the exact statistics, but I know that the prevalence of psychotic breaks when ingesting, especially the potency of marijuana and the different things that they have now, it's wild, and it's incredibly damaging for young people. They don't get it. So when you're talking about, like, listen, smoking pot is one thing. But when you don't know where it's coming from, the number of pesticides that they put on it that are incredibly damaging, the things it could be laced with, and the fact that it's cost prohibitive to grow it legally in a lot of areas, right?
Right.
The fact that you have legal marijuana in, so let's say, Oregon, doesn't mean the marijuana you're consuming in Oregon is a good idea, because it is very expensive with all the taxation and regulation to grow it. So there are a lot of illegal growing operations. Are you guys seeing those as well in Idaho? Like, is it the kind of thing where you're busting people that are manufacturing or growing things within the state borders?
No, I'm not aware of that. I just met with Idaho State Police Colonel this morning. We talked about fentanyl and all this stuff, and he did not notate any of that with me. We discussed the drug issue. And I wanted to follow up on one thing about the mandatory sentence of the bill that I'm working on. What you mentioned, with this high demand, this bill that I'm specifically working on, the mandatory sentence is run. I'm kind of helping. I'm a co-sponsor with that, but that's led by somebody else. But this fentanyl bill I'm working on, it's fentanyl murder. So if someone dies from fentanyl, and that person who provided that fentanyl is responsible for murder. So you understand, they did this in Nebraska. This is serious. So, and I asked the folks down there in LA, how do you track that? They track it by cell phone, because your activity is tracked. They go, so this really puts some serious teeth into the law. I'm just a dealer here, and I'm going to give this kid some of this meth or some of this fentanyl, and it could be, maybe one pill's going to kill him. Hey, he knows what he's doing. He knows at this point I am providing basically a grenade to this kid. And if he dies, I'm going to go to prison as a murderer. And that is serious. That's worked. It's done in a couple states. They've done it in Florida, they're in Nebraska, and it works. That closes the loop on that. So if you want to go ahead and bring into Idaho, yeah, it's $1,000 a pill. And if that kid dies, we're going to come put you in jail for murder. Serious business. It's not as severe as Singapore, but you think you want to get involved with drugs here with that kind of penalty? I think I'm going to find another alternative path.
Yeah, that is remarkable, because you think of traffickers, they pop in, they pop out. If they get across the state border, they're like, hey, I made it. I'm good, no problem. But if you're talking about the risk being on the end of the person who actually has to distribute and engage with the end customer, knowing how dangerous it is, like they'd start putting disclaimers on the bottles. They're like, listen, only half of one or what. And of course you're dealing with somebody who's taking fentanyl. They're not going to be paying that close attention to it. That's a remarkable bill. Yeah. And you're saying you're co-sponsoring this one?
I am leading that one. I'm the last year they tried to get this bill across for the mandatory sentence. It did get out of committee. Gotcha. So there was pushback for the same reason. They said, this is Susie didn't know, all these excuses. No, these excuses, no. We need to bring the people in that have seen I would say when you want something to get across the line, you bring the blood and the guts into the story, and it works. You bring the police, show the results, show the numbers, show that on the street. Then suddenly, again, this is the old focus. Focus on the objective. They worry about peripheral things that are really not really an issue. So there's not going to be anybody innocent in this. They try to say, they might have this and they didn't know. No, they knew. They knew exactly what they're doing, or someone around them did. Use them as a conduit. That's possible. Right. But when they arrest, they'll be able to figure that out. But you don't want to provide off-ramps, because if you provide an off-ramp, it's up to the judge. No. If you got 50 pills, there's no off-ramp. I said, they didn't know what they're doing. Tough beans. You're guilty. You're going down. That's what you got to do. And so that message will get across. No, there's no leeway here. And I guarantee you they're guilty every single time. They're saying, it could be this, could be. The police, when they arrest, they'll find exceptions. There always is. And they'll know that at the arrest point. Because it's very, very obvious that someone could have snuck that in the purse and that person didn't know. Yes. So they'll figure that out at the point of arrest. But those people usually involved will have some sort of a record, some sort of a path, and they'll be able to track that, I think, confidently that law will be precise.
Yeah, and the argument that you essentially the end delivery mechanism is like this weak link, right? Like grandma. It's like this old lady. So you have all these bad guys, this whole machine behind grandma. It's like find a grandma, put 50 pills in her bag, and send her in, right? Because that will be the weak link. First off, it's not accurate, because grandma, as you're saying, most likely knows what's going on. Yeah. And two, you just open the market to find more grandmas or children or things of that nature. One of the criticisms I heard of the keeping families intact once they cross the border is that actually increased human trafficking and abuse with children, because they're people that wanted to come across the border. Adults realized, like, okay, look, I need a kid. I don't have a kid. I need a kid. I need to get across the border with this kid, and then we can make an argument for this kind of treatment or that kind of treatment, or please don't separate us, whatever it may be, and we will get a more favorable outcome or a better foothold within the United States. Well, what that did is increase the value of a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old that then you had sympathy from law enforcement that eventually caught you.
Yes. That is exactly true. And this human trafficking thing was, that's where they're making their money right now. This human trafficking.
Explain it really from the beginning then. So we kind of touched on the fentanyl. There's more there, but let's talk about human trafficking.
Okay, well, when I went down after doing this check with the governor, I said, okay, I'm going to do my border check myself. And I went down to Eagle Pass, and that's one of the most active places along the Rio Grande. And I got the Texas Rangers to support me. Showed up there. I brought a friend of mine, Max Brown, with me. So he's a good friend of mine. We went down there. And the first thing I noticed when I show up there is the amount of resources that are aligned for this. You have Border Patrol, you have Texas Rangers, Army Guard, everyone's armed to the teeth with rifles and everything. There's boats on the river. It's looked like this is a war zone. It looks like they're armed and configured like a war zone. Then when I get out there, they have concertina wire, and they have some of these empty shipping containers of the wall. But it's just an illusion, because these people, as soon as they get across the river, they kind of hang out along the bank. When the Border Patrol comes to dress them, and they take them away, and they're in America. It's like literally you might as well have a bridge with a turnstile, because it's just hard to cross the river. I saw some dangerous, some when people almost got swept away, but it does not stopping anybody. It's just a random wide open border. When we got the brief from the ranger there, he showed me this bar graph of all this, the last presidents, and then there's Biden. It just literally off the charts. Right now, you're talking like probably 8 million plus have come to the country under his watch.
8 million people have made the crossing from Mexico to the United States in the last 3 years.
Yes. They were talking about 10,000 in a day. So
they're sitting there watching this.
It's just, you watch this, and I watch this, and these groups of people trying to cross the river, and they finally get across, and they sit down there. It's just a big game. Then eventually they let them up, and they process them, and they move them out, and they ship them off to New York or wherever they're going to go. The best part of this whole thing is all the sanctuary states quacked a big game, and now they're rolling in it.
Like Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah.
What did they send? They sent 50 to Martha's Vineyard?
And they melted down. Those are the biggest bunch of liberals quack. They're up there, oh, yeah, open borders, bring them on up. And then, well, not in my backyard. Whoa, easy. That's the classic response of a liberal. They quack a big game until they actually have to face it.
I don't know. San Francisco's facing it real well. They don't seem to mind at all. I didn't go to the city. So I grew up in Northern California, and I went to the best college I got into. That happened to be Berkeley. I don't care for Berkeley at all. I don't care for Berkeley politics. It was the best education I could get, right? The best degree I could get, rather. Right. I did benefit from the education greatly. But I went into the city like once or twice. I don't care for the city at all. And it always cracked me up because here you have people doing drugs. Like, you got a guy shooting up, you got a guy crapping himself, or just shitting on the sidewalk. He doesn't even have the dignity to crap in his pants. He's just pants down, taking a dump. Right. And look, I'm not saying I was the best 21-year-old. And it's like, you're walking back to the car, you got to take a leak or something. Somebody's like, no, don't do that, because you're going to get, the cops will bust you if you do it. I'm like, there's a guy literally like shooting heroin right there. They're like, I know, but you're like a normal person. So the law applies to you. You can't behave poorly. They're not going to mess with heroin dude over here, but they're going to write you up. So like, don't do that. And it was wild to me that there are double standards for law-abiding citizens and then completely crazy drug addicts. And look, if that's the way the San Francisco populace wants to live, have at it, man. Yeah. Like, that's fine. And we should be compassionate, Ted. Like, come on now.
Yeah. Well, my compassion's kind of worn out. But when I saw the LA thing, like I said, I've been all over the world. It was humiliating. That it's the worst place I've seen in my life.
What did you see?
I go down the street. It used to be the old Jewelry District. It's old downtown LA. And all these multi-story buildings are all boarded up. They're all empty. Along the streets, it's boarded, and there's graffiti and all these fences and stuff. There's people in the street wandering around, staggered, high and drunk. You come down another street, there's all these tents. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Now, San Francisco, I saw some of it. I've seen some bad stuff in Sacramento. But this was different because the whole downtown, usually in Sacramento, they're in a location where a whole bunch of warehouses are or something, kind of away from. This is right downtown. The entire downtown was like Berlin of 1945, empty, destroyed. It was just amazing to me how bad it was. And it's embarrassing. I go overseas and I talk to people in Australia, and they pick on America, and I don't defend it anymore. I can't defend it. I mean, what's going on over there? What's wrong with you guys? Your cities Australian cities are beautiful. They don't have any of this. What are we doing different than the Australians? No homeless, no drugs in the streets. Their cities are beautiful. Their malls are beautiful. Their public spaces are beautiful. Why? What's different? Yeah, we have to take a look at that. And what are we doing in America? We're doing everything wrong because their cities are beautiful and ours are the worst in the world. And I say that unequivocally, we're the worst in the world, with exceptions probably New Delhi. So America is, can I say shithole on this? Cities are a shithole. And it's embarrassing for me. It makes me angry that I'm trying to defend my country, and it says, I can't. I mean, yeah, they look at us and say, what's wrong with you? I wish I knew. And it's all about permissive attitude. Yeah, just let these people, if you enable bad behavior, you're going to get it. If we stop giving them the needles and we start getting a fire hose each day and clean the streets with the tents and everything on it, they won't come back. You got to make it hard. You can't make it easy. And the easier we make it, the more people that sign up for it. When I was a kid, there was no homeless. In Idaho and Boise, it was too cold, but homeless was non-existent. And it was non-existent 10 years ago. It was rare. I saw it when I lived in Hawaii. It was pretty prevalent there. because it's warm, but nothing like it is now. And this has happened in the last 10 years. America's lost its way in these cities. We all know it.
Listen, I'm not going to argue with you there. I have to go back to Berkeley and Oakland periodically. And last time I was there, I had to swing by Home Depot in Oakland, had to pick up some stuff. And going to the Home Depot, I was driving and I was like, oh my God, what is this? And I actually grabbed my phone and videotaped like the last 15 seconds, literally leading up to the driveway into Home Depot. And it was so mind-boggling. It literally looked like something out of, like a science fiction movie, like dystopian future where, everybody's dying and it's, drugs and just campers torn up with graffiti everywhere. Yep. You mentioned Antifa and essentially real fundamental societal espionage. There was a video I saw years ago from a supposed ex-KGB agent in the 80s, and he was talking about how Russia was really working hard to demoralize the United States. Mm-hmm. And he was like, it's amazing how easy it was to demoralize the community. Like they took to it, the country, they took to it like flies on shit, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really get what he was saying. As a younger man, I was kind of like, what do you demoralize? Like, well, how do you mean? But you see what has happened now. The idea that, hey, it's bad to establish and enforce laws, right? Or the drug abuser, a drug user and the whole drug chain in San Francisco, it's like you need to have compassion for those people. They're really struggling. Or we should let them steal $900 to $1,000 worth of stuff and have it only be a ticket. Because, by the way, they're probably, and this is the actual argument I've heard people make, they're probably stealing because they literally need things to eat. It's like, well, then why aren't they stealing bread? If they need something to eat, why aren't they stealing the thing they actually need? Because there's an economy around stolen narcotics and even stolen pharmaceutical drugs and things of that nature. So the demoralization of the United States appears to be something that's alive and well, where it's kind of like we can't even all agree on what our moral obligations are to each other and to the country, right? That the idea that we need to exercise compassion, and that looks like allowing drug users and criminals and whatnot to just proliferate in our city streets. That's compassion, right? That's the right thing to do. You were born and raised in Idaho. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I wanted to move to Idaho is because I believed Idaho had a strong moral backing. It had an understanding of itself. A dear friend of mine in California, I like these people a lot. Again, dear friend. When the BLM movement of 2020 rolled around, mm-hmm. they started making some really weird noises about it. I was like, what are you talking about? These particular people were from out of the country and had moved there. And again, dear friends of mine. But they started saying things like, well, it's because we're white. Like, that's why we have things. That's why you have nice things. I was like, wait, what do you mean it's because we're white? First off, I'm not even white. I'm Mexican. My grandparents are from Mexico, right? So whatever you're saying I have because of my skin tone, like you're missing the mark here. And a gal showed up to her house, one of my friend's houses, this woman, African-American woman, and it was a scam. This woman there's a very common thing. They drop people off in individual neighborhoods, and those people go and essentially harvest as much guilt and money from the residents, and then they get picked up. Yeah, I mean, later, by the time this woman made it down the street, people started calling the police, and the white van came, picked this woman up, and she disappeared, right? But when she appeared at my friend's house, she said, hey, can I ask you something? And my friend said, sure. She said, hey, do you think if I worked as hard as you, I could be living in this house? Caucasian woman, and, this woman speaking was African-American. And my friend, who's Caucasian, said, well, probably not, because, the world isn't fair. And then she started to go down this guilt and like, well, what about me? Just because I'm dark skinned, all these things. And I asked her, I said, did you respond to the woman and ask, do you think if I tried as hard as Obama, I could be president? Right? Do you think if I tried really hard, I could be a famous comedian like Eddie Murphy? The answer is no, because there are a lot of things that go into it. Eddie Murphy's a perfect example. I'm not as funny and brilliant as Eddie Murphy. That's it. I'm not Chris Rock. Like, I'm not talented. I'm not Key and Peele. I'm not Dave Chappelle. These people have a level of skill and grit and determination that has allowed them to get to a certain place in their life, right? Yep. Do you see the moral fabric of Idaho changing from where you were as a kid to now do you see an aspect of demoralization where you have people that start forgetting how hard it was to get where they were, or saying they just have things just because of their skin tone, or things of that nature? I know that's not really what we're talking about now, but it's an aspect of demoralization where we start changing our opinions with criminalization of actual criminals.
Well, what I picked on is Marxism. It comes in many different faces. So when you say all these things that you see, I look at it as almost revolutionary. When I studied the revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, you study what they want to do. And what's Marxism is a disruption. It used to be a class disruption. You're trying to turn this country into a socialist utopia. That was the BLM objective. That wasn't a Marxist entity, a disruptive entity. So you look at all the other things from CRT is very disruptive and divisive. Anti-racist racism and all these things that come out of these things, how to be an anti-racist is the most. I read the book and I said the only way for me to be an anti-racist is to go cut my wrists and bleed out somewhere. I mean, I literally can't ever fix it. So it was just the victimhood is everyone becomes a victim. All this separation along race and on gender, and the gender is another piece of it. And now we even have feminism is becoming militant, where they're actually they look at the patriarchy and having a baby as being an indentured servant. That's a strange way to look at the family. So BLM was destruction of the nuclear family. That was their objective. In Marxism, socialism, that was this. And then you look at CRT, well, that is somewhat divisive in every possible way. And DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, where it starts out nice, but it really is not. It's very, very specifically racist. And I see it in my company where they actually say we want to hire 80% of people of color. That's illegal. That's against the Constitution and the 1964 Civil Rights Act. You can't say that. If you said we're going to hire 80% white people, can you imagine?
Oh my God, you'd be dead.
And so this is ridiculous. So equity, you got to remember, people understand equity is not equality. Equity is about we all got to get to the same level. So it doesn't matter how you work. I have to get the same thing you have. That's all about the Marxist movement. Equity is a very dangerous word, and I think trying to pull equity in the military, I almost choked on myself. Equity in the military, where we're going to have all get together and everyone's a colonel, and we're going to all come together and decide what to fight. How does that work? So it's equality is what we all see, and that's a great thing. Everyone has equality and quality of opportunity. But equity means I don't have to try, and these people aren't doing well, so we just give them everything and we'll just redistribute the income or redistribute whatever. That is the whole Marxist movement, is you disrupt all facets of society. Everyone is looking at everyone else as being I'm a victim. I'm a bigger victim than you. You owe me because, I'm a bigger victim because I got all this intersectionality thing. I'm transgender and multiple other things I can pull in. I'm a triple victim. So it's just disruptive. It takes the society sideways, and it actually has affected the moral level of this country. And I think it's really gone sideways. Religion is failing. We see that's happening. It's almost like watching Western Europe when religion literally disappeared. It's come way down. Back when I was, a young man, it was like 80%, were considered religious. Now it's down to like 40%. The people that actually trust the military used to be in the high 60s. Now it's down in the 40s. The amount of people, young people that are willing to serve or able to serve is down to like 11%. They don't want to because they're told every day that their country's bad and everything's bad and you're bad and everyone else is bad. You could see this divisiveness that I've watched in my lifetime, and it's just toxic. And this conglomeration of all these different subcomponents of Marxism, I use DEI, all those are Marxist entities of disruption that supersede just the class portion of it. It used to just be, when you look at Marx, it's class, it's class, it's class. Well, class is not strong enough now because everyone's pretty good. Everyone's got a cell phone in a car, and everyone's got sushi and going to getting coffee. That's not going to work. You got to pick on something else. And this is where, like, the frustration when you see someone says, well, I have this skin color and I can't do as well. The problem with that is the Asians come over here and totally smoke everybody. And the people that smoke, it shouldn't be white privilege, it should be Asian privilege, because they come in here and they don't speak the language. In 3 years, they're just rocking. And the highest income group, especially basically in general, is the Asians and the Indians. They do super, super well because they come in and they perform. And the excuse of, oh, I'm a victim, you can wallow in that all day. I can't do well because I'm a victim. Well, I think that's not productive. If you step up and take responsibility, and this is the biggest thing about the victimization, someone needs to take the responsibility. Hey, if I just take responsibility for my life and do the right thing, maybe things will work out. I've never heard a leader say that. That doesn't come out ever. It's never about, hey, why don't I step up and be responsible and actually be a father and be home? What is the keys to success? It's the nuclear family. The nuclear family with a father and a mother. That's why the Asians do well.
I was going to say, culturally, Asian Americans have a much higher rate of two-parent households.
Absolutely.
The Asian American women actually out-earn Caucasian men, which is just marginally, but they stay in education longer. They have spouses, so they're not raising children by themselves, and that was always the thing. Around 2020, and the BLM movement, there was a huge push to take out standardized testing from college admissions because there's a disparity in standardized, let's say the SAT. You want to go to college, well, guess what? Asian Americans and Caucasian Americans outperform statistically, or rather on average, Hispanic Americans and Black Americans. Okay, great. That's just the way it goes. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, but it's very, very hard to flush out. So what people say is, okay, well, because they don't say Asian Americans. They say because Caucasian Americans score higher than, let's say I'm Hispanic, than Hispanic Americans, we should get rid of this test because it's discriminatory in the acceptance realm. Because if you're accepting a metric that we know Caucasian Americans score higher on, you're discriminating against Hispanic Americans. But they always neglect the Asian American component, which is, hey, you might have people coming here from other places, Asian countries, that have so little. They have, in fact, nothing. Yeah. There was a school in the district where I moved from that was predominant. It was like 95% Asian American, Asian and Indian, right? So Chinese and Indian. They were monsters. The school was absolutely a powerhouse, and the culture there was one of absolute meritocracy. They didn't take excuses from parents or the children. The parents weren't trying to make excuses for the kids. They had something like 25 to 50% of their junior class qualified for national merit on the SAT. So these were incredibly hardworking individuals. It's like, well, how do you take that as a case study where it's like, here you have immigrants coming with absolutely nothing, and you had multifamily households where you have your 3-bedroom townhouse and 2 families living there because they're working so hard and trying to save money. Yeah. And they're squashing the kids that live just down the street in these nice houses. So again, the cultural aspect that I think you're alluding to, which is, look, there are cultural disparities that play into results at the performance level. And it is unfortunate if you, like, I came from a single parent household. My parents got divorced when I was very young. Okay. Statistically, I would have been far better off if I had a 2-parent household. Now I'm fine. I'm not complaining and I love my parents and it is what it is. But if you have a culture that has, let's say 25 2-parent household compared to 80% 2-parent households, you're going to see a distinct difference in performance for youth in athletics and academics and every aspect of that. And again, playing into what you're saying, the Asian American culture very much agrees and believes in a 2-parent household and not just breaking things off. So I don't know how we got on that particular topic, but
it's part of the
we were talking about the demoralization of the American culture, and that those types of things in Dublin, California, actually, not Dublin, but Dublin, California. They're a very strong Asian American and Indian American population there. They pushed back against equity grading like you would not believe. The school board tried to introduce things where they essentially, it would be like a handicap in golf or like in bowling or like, it's something that wasn't a direct meritocracy. They were like, no, absolutely not. We're not tolerating this for our children or who our children will be compared to in this district. And they, of course, can't affect other areas. But again, culturally, they don't believe in that. And you can see the results in their performance in the professional careers and the academic careers.
Well, I'll give you a classic example. Been an aviator my whole life. Do you want equity in aviation when someone's flying your family one, or you want equality? Do you want to get the best person there or the person that just got the special case? I've seen it. We tried to force feed people that weren't ready for it. You will kill people. And I've seen the force feeding, it always goes sideways. So do you want the person got the best grades to do your heart surgery, or are you going to feel all good about the equity? Equity is fine until you face the repercussions of what that means. And I think it's very, meritocracy is the way. The military was that, and it was pure, and there was no race involved. It never was until now. It was never an issue. Now it is, because they make it an issue. So you get these young kids that are told this, and suddenly, wait, okay, this is not fair. Now they keep telling me that's not fair. Well, what's interesting to watch this, I've seen ghettos down in Nevada of destroyed white families. It's about the culture and the families. Destroyed meth families, dad's on meth, mom's in jail. These are a mess. This is really a behavior thing than a race thing. I use this anecdotal evidence when Nigerians come over here as refugees, as Christians. They smoke it because they're strict families. I heard a story where their kid got in trouble in school. The mother, the father, the granddad, the aunt showed up to the principal's office to address it. Then the white kid, nobody shows up because dad's in jail and mom's home doing nothing. So it is a behavior thing. It's a culture thing, and it's not a racial thing. If they want to make it so, I think it's less than that, because you can prove. That's why the Asian thing goes sideways, because they're so successful.
Right. They're a minority everywhere in the
Yes.
population except education. And then in education, it's like, again, in Berkeley, I think it was like 51% Asian American.
Yes.
But 51% of the population of California is not Asian American. They just work really, really, and I shouldn't say they, but I can tell you the people at Berkeley worked really, really hard.
Right.
And again, you have a higher percent of the population in these higher upper echelon academic institutions, right? Anyway, college is another thing. I get very heated about it.
Right.
If I may bring you back,
Okay.
the trafficking in Idaho, what is going on with this? You sponsored a bill, it's my understanding, that tried to increase the punishment for traffickers and improve the care for those being trafficked, right? Because if you're some 6-year-old and you were kidnapped and, untold abuses done to you, that kid ends up in Idaho. You want to protect that kid.
Right.
Explain this to me. Where's the trafficking in Idaho? What's the pull? And what's happening?
That is a really difficult one to track. And what's interesting, when I went to a trafficking working group, it requires a task force to address it, and we don't have the law enforcement in this valley to address it. He said, I asked the question, first question asked, and they had this panel, and I go, well, what can we do to do this? It requires a task force to address this trafficking. And he looked, well, we don't have enough people to do that. LA can do that. Boise cannot. We in Eagle, we're razor thin. We don't have enough forces in Eagle to think about a task force to go after drugs or trafficking or fentanyl or anything else. We can barely hold the line just for law enforcement. So that is the hardest part. That stuff doesn't even get touched. No one's looking at it. It's barely touched at all. When I went to the civilian police academy here about 8 years ago, and they showed the incidents of pedophilia, and what they'd show a map of all the points where people were accessing child pornography. They say people that access child pornography, 80% of them act on their impulses. They had a 1% conviction rate, 1%, because they don't go after that piece of it. That's part of the component of that. But the trafficking piece, it can be trafficking with your next door neighbor. This is when the trafficking comes kind of open-ended, where a 16-year-old runs away from home. And it's an young eagle girl that says, "Oh, we'll take care of you. We'll feed you here." And before they know it, she's a prostitute. So there's trafficking has a complex, and you have the human trafficking coming across the border. That is extremely difficult to address. How do you do that? Do you pull people over when the Idaho State Police and try to find out? Let me check your DNA,
right? Your papers
you
or something.
Can't.
Yeah,
there's
right.
literally nothing they can do, and it's just extremely frustrating. But it takes real law enforcement and a lot of resources to address that. How do you know that a young girl's in stress when this person's hauling them around and she's scared and she can't do anything about it? How do you find these people? We have a bill. We're going to follow up this. I'm not leading this bill. That's a couple other reps are going to go after this. After that, the Sound of Freedom came out, that movie. I watched that and I was angry. I mean, how does this happen? How can this possibly happen? Well, number one, you go after the scumbags who actually are the demand makers. You get these guys, and I said this in the police academy, I said we should take them out and castrate them. And they're like, well, you can't do that. Well, why not? They won't come back. There won't be any repeat offenders. I look at it like anybody who touches a little child, touches my little, I have a child and that happens to me. That's not going to go well for that person who's involved with that. So we need to really, really go after that. And we never go out. They never get nailed. It's like literally super, super low conviction rate.
Okay, why is that? You're talking of conviction rate, so I assume
they can't find them. It requires resources. It requires a task force that we don't have.
Okay, so how do they know when you say, "Hey, look, these are all of the areas where people are accessing child pornography"? Mm-hmm. How do they establish those areas?
They could do that. They can monitor They can monitor that behavior.
Okay, so they're essentially saying, look, from a digital standpoint, these people are accessing child pornography. Mm-hmm. And statistically, 80% of the people accessing child pornography are going to act on their impulses. Yes. But we lack the resources, manpower and otherwise, to create a task force that could set up the operations that would absolutely convict these people.
Absolutely. And I think it's when you watch that movie, it shows that creepy guy at the end, taking this. It's who is the receiving product here.
But pull this a little bit closer if you want.
And I would say, obviously the law is going to be real severe on that. It's, again, you come after these people and you rip their lips off, as I say. I use that term a lot in the military, rip their lips off. You come after them and they suffer and you punish these guys. And these guys, the recidivism is really high. You put them in jail and they come out and do it again. So we really don't have an effective force on this, but it requires a lot of law enforcement. I talked to the Idaho State Police this morning. They are razor thin, barely able to hold the line. And in Eagle, we know we don't have enough people to do that. And I did some ride-alongs in Boise. You'd be shocked. Some evenings there's maybe 6 roving patrol cars for 300,000 people. So you go, what? I mean, it can get really, really, it is a razor thin line and they can barely contain it. Boise has a higher ratio than, say, Eagle. Eagle, we live in a pretty peaceful community. But if you want to lean into this, say the fentanyl, the risk, the gangs would look at this place and go, well, this is a sheep's pen. Everyone in Eagle thinks they got this thing good to go. I would look, this is a great target. A lot of rich people. I'm going to go after this place. So law enforcement needs to be proactive, needs to look forward. You don't react to the threat. You proactively engage and prepare for the threat so that threat never becomes an issue. That's how you do it in the military. You don't wait until someone blows you up. You prepare yourself and defend yourself and go get them first. So that's the way I think of it. And everyone has a tendency to be a little reactive. Wait until it's a crisis. Some of this stuff we can't afford, but this task force is really important. When I asked this question, I got no answer. So there's nothing going to change. How are you going to track down this trafficking? Who's going to look at it? There's nobody. Nobody's doing anything. So nothing's going to change. So you have to interdict it at the border. Okay. Good luck with that.
It doesn't stop the locally sponsored trafficking.
It doesn't stop the local at all. So it requires, and you can't stop everything. And I understand, so this is the challenges. We have to take a look. What's important, human trafficking, fentanyl, all these things, when it gets to be a crisis, this is when you really know you're not ready. And we talked about a school shooting. There's not enough police in the local area if they had to cover Eagle High with a possible shooter. It'd take every police that we have, and there'd be nobody left. There's not enough. It takes 8 cars. It takes eight cops to even contain the boundary, let alone shut it down. I talked to, I have a bunch of police friends there's a lot of police that live in Eagle, a lot. Retired police, they know a whole bunch of ex-SWAT guys, some real meat eater guys that know their business. And they say, this place is not configured to manage much. So we use the example of you have an event over here, an event over here. If there's a third event, that third event's not going to be, no one's going to go there. So this is the risk you take. We got just enough. It's kind of like in the military, I say, we just enough to barely hold the line, but what happens if they bring more guys? We lose the war. So there's a certain preemptive posture we need to address, and that's, when we talk about fentanyl and all this enforcement, it's a real interesting discussion. I mean, politically, it's no one wants to spend more money. I get it, but everybody wants to be safe. And the day that your child, becomes a product of trafficking because there's nobody paying attention to this, then suddenly it becomes very important. Or if your son dies of fentanyl, no one's paid attention to it in the valley, suddenly it becomes very important. So that those task forces and suddenly make a lot more sense. They do to me. I'd like to see a lot more police. I like to see a lot more presence, and that's me personally. I think that most of the law enforcement here would agree with me that we need to prepare ourselves and posture ourselves for the threat and not react to it. And that's all these different issues, from fentanyl to trafficking to gangs to just dealing with the crisis. The city's grown dramatically, and the force is not really ready to meet that growth.
Do you think that the representatives at the state level collectively understand not just the threat, but the actual real life issues that are going on, like the presumed prevalence of pedophilia, the prevalence of trafficking, the prevalence of fentanyl and other narcotics within the state? Do you think that the average representative is educated on this and actually conveying it to the populace? Because what I'm wondering as you're going through this is, there's a big debate right now in Eagle about law enforcement and deterrent versus reaction, right? And some people are saying, hey, we're a very safe place. We don't need the people throwing around 1 per 1,000. And I'm not asking you to make comment on the mayoral race or any of that. But some people are saying that, we need more because we need to be a deterrent. And other people are saying that's not warranted in this area because we don't really have this problem. But they're responding only to the numbers of, for instance, calls, right, and reported crimes. So you're talking about somebody who, runs away from home. Parents don't know where that person is. And that person is being used as a prostitute, 10 miles away, or locked in the back of a van that gets driven around. I mean, horrible imagination, but it's reality for some people. Do you think that the actual prevalence of crime, be it drug crime or human trafficking, is not being conveyed effectively to the populace?
Well, the governor did an event with this fentanyl portion, and they did a data call across the state, and every single law enforcement person in the state agreed it was a crisis and it was important. The law enforcement across the state gets it, 100%. They do, and that came through the report, that governor report that came out, and it was called Esto Perpetua, and the report was decisive, and everybody cares. I think that in some communities, when you live in the rural community, it doesn't really feel like it's important. Yeah, they probably are less concerned, understandably so. But guess what? Some of the worst drug stuff I've ever heard about are from the farm communities. You hear terrible things that happen. They have anything to do, so what do? It's not. They aren't immune at all. So I think that they're pretty much aware of what's going on. And I think coming up when we talk about this fentanyl thing, I think people are going to really want action. I think it's time, and I think they understand it pretty well. I do.
The representatives at the state level.
I think so.
Do you think that you and I are talking right now, right? And hopefully the people that listen understand what a crisis this actually is and how dangerous it is for everyone, not just teens, but, anybody who pops a fentanyl pill or gets it accidentally, at risk. Do you think that the population in general, from the people you convey in the civilian world, do you think that they fully understand? Is it being conveyed sufficiently enough to the voting base?
I think there needs to be more education on this. I put out a newsletter. I'm going to put one out in fentanyl. I put on my immigration. I'm doing an immigration bill and my immigration visit, and I put this out to my district, but I only have like 5,000 emails. There's 55,000 people in this district. Is my message getting across just to people in my own district? No, probably not. But when I do this fentanyl and I put some fentanyl numbers in there, the 110,000 and the 2 grams and the number one killer for kids between 18 and 45, we need to get that out more. And when I do another newsletter, I'd hope you help me get this thing out. It's going to be informational. And I'm going to put all these data points and all this stuff I've learned and what's important and what we're trying to do so people are aware. I think people are going to understand. Yeah, the average person, you're a retired person and this is just not going to be in your windscreen at all. But we need to get that out there to the parents, especially. And the number one piece they said, drugs about education, interdiction, and treatment. Education's pretty huge. Interdiction I see as a big piece of it because the treatment becomes less important because everyone's dead.
Right.
So the treatment.
Right. You don't have a chance to get to treatment.
Yeah, it's not the problem. You don't recover from dying. So we need this interdiction piece, we need to squeeze that thing down. So the demand is like, it costs $1,000 a pill. And, that's going to stop that pretty quick.
That's going to be bad business.
Yeah.
It was one thing you said about if you're a retired person, this isn't really on your radar. If that's people's opinion, say I'm 70 and I'm retired. I'm like, it's not really something I care about. In my mind, what a mistake for that person to think. Because one, do you have kids? Right? Probably adult kids. Mm-hmm. Do you have grandchildren? Because if you have adult children and then grandchildren, you better be concerned with the world that they're existing in, because this is real. If you have a granddaughter, that's, again, a risk. We're talking human trafficking. You might be 70. You're like, hey, look, nobody's going to traffic me. Yeah, but you have loved ones that are at risk.
Yeah, I think that is not an accurate, when I say that, kind of a blanket. But honestly, They probably are as hardcore as any of them. Old guys, they're like, hey, let's hammer these guys. Let's go get them. Sure. That's probably not even fair. But I'm just saying the people, they probably might care even more. But it's just, you feel like some people, it doesn't seem important to them. Hey, my kids are good. I don't have to worry about it. I think a lot of people are naive and apathetic until they really understood the risks. I think that's really more accurate. I don't think I could identify any group because actually, my dad would have been all over this. He would have been crazy, let's get them. So I think that's not fair. But there's a lot of people are just going to not pay attention for whatever reason because they don't feel it's a problem of theirs.
They're not seeing the problem.
Yes.
That's why I was asking, do you think it's being properly conveyed?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, people are going to rally against the thing they see in front of them. And it's interesting earlier that you brought up Marxism, because essentially at the core of it, Marxism is, look, we have to separate this group of people into two separate groups, right? One is the oppressor, classically the bourgeoisie, right? And one is the oppressed, the proletariat, the workers, right? And so you have communism where it breaks it up, oppressor and the oppressed from an economic standpoint. You have feminism, right? Women and their allies, and then men, right? Those are the two classes. You have environmentalists, environmental destroyers, and you have racist, right? People that are, or racism rather. So you have the racists up here. And then, as you pointed out, you have the minorities that are being treated unfairly, and the allies who can never rid themselves of racism, how to fix racism, how to address racism, the book you reference. You're right. There's no end. It's not like, oh, no, do this, and then you're checked. It's like, no. This is part of your identity for the rest of your time. And by the way, if you for a second let off the gas pedal, you are back to the racist category. So there's this splitting of essentially good person and bad person in all of these different areas. And it's a philosophical tool and tactic to essentially split people up and then say, okay, by the way, if you're not standing with the oppressed, you're as bad as the oppressor. So you have to actively take part in one of these two groups. And if you abstain, they're like, no, you're with that group. You're like, no, I'm just not taking sides. They're like, no, there is no taking sides. You either stand with us and scream in the middle of the street and block ambulances and people trying to get to work, or you're as bad as the Nazis. I'm just pointing that out. So the point is...
That was excellent, by the way.
Appreciate you.
Spot on.
Appreciate you. So I think what people are taken by is there's so much crisis because of these philosophical bents, because people are trying to get your attention with the environment. They're trying to get your attention with schools. They're trying to get your attention with, BLM and all these different things, that when real, meaningful, articulatable crises come along, we have a fentanyl crisis. This is not an existential crisis. This is not a future crisis. This is not, we need to teach more dark history so that people understand in 50 years crisis. Right now, this is a crisis. I think it's so hard to get people to see that and understand that and get it in front of them. Because, look, you're not sitting on Instagram all day screaming about the fentanyl crisis, but I guarantee you there's somebody sitting on Instagram within a 10-mile radius of us all day screaming about like the environmental crisis or, the feminist crisis or something like that. It's, classically law enforcement people are not really like big social media people. So the people who have the actual information, the ones we need to hear from, they're not the ones that have the biggest loudspeaker. And the reason I'm asking is I think we need to have more, like you're saying, education and communication from the people, boots on the ground. Look, this is what we're actually seeing, because I think populists would change their priorities. I think the average person, especially the average Idahoan, I've found them to be very respected by their lifetime Idahoan or an immigrant from somewhere else. These are people who moved here intentionally because you don't land here by accident. That's what I'm saying. Like, you could end up in Arizona by accident, right? Or like Oregon by accident. You're not ending up here by accident.
Right.
And I think educating the population and helping them understand, like, look, these are actual crises. Like this, we're not talking Greta Thunberg. Like, people are dying. It's like, okay, look, people actually are dying right here. Here's the dead person, right? I just think there needs to be more of that. And it's dark and difficult, but
it's good, I think, at the school level. I think at the schools and the high schools and junior highs stuff, I think the education program is pretty good there. But how do you get to everyone else? How do you get to you and me? I didn't know anything about this till I stuck my nose into it.
Right.
I never had any idea what it was until I become intimately involved by seeing it on the streets. So I know it better than 99% of the guys now. Okay. But before I didn't, and my nephew died from fentanyl. I go, I thought it was heroin. Oh, yeah, my brother said it was fentanyl. So, okay, I didn't know that, and he told me that. So suddenly it is an issue as I became educated. So, hey, here I'm in the middle of the business, and I didn't know until I stuck my nose into it. See, the education's not very good. Where are you going to get it? I think, social media only hits a very small part of the population. I send emails out. How many people actually read them? Right. It's hard to get it. Really, it's hard to get across. It really is.
Well, you and I are going to talk after this because I want to help you. Listen, I've had you here for a long time. I know you're flying all around, meeting with all kinds of people. Is there anything else you'd like to express right now?
Well, I got so many bills lined up right now, it's not even funny. But I'll just say, immigration bill.
Tell me about this, because you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I keep wanting to ask, and then the conversation keeps going. Yeah. Tell me about the immigration bill.
Real simple. Immigration bill, E-Verify. So if you're illegal, you can't get a job here because the employers have to E-Verify that you are legal or on a visa. If they hire you and they're found to hire you, then there's penalties. And if you continue to do that, then they can take away licenses. So this can be an impact for employers. You hire 10 illegals, so you'll be penalized. E-Verify has always been on the books. It is on the books federally, but no one enforces it. So enforce that, and then the piece of that is to also track whatever medical use illegals use, because this is the argument that will say if we don't allow illegals, this is basically employers. They're openly saying, I want an illegal because they're cheap, and if you do that, it's going to cost me more money. Well, wait, this is how you track you track the medical use, and you'll find out what's happening is the taxpayer is subsidizing you because we're paying for their medical. You're not. They're not paying taxes. They're using medical and education. Well, we'll just show the medical piece, and they show this in Florida. So I am paying him $12 an hour, but it's really costing us $22 an hour because we're subsidizing them, for their medical as we need to. They have to have medical care, but they're not paying for it, and the employer's not paying for it. So the taxpayers are subsidizing illegals for cheap labor. And that's Florida did that, and so did Texas. They both did that for a reason, because the pushback is, well, the cost of strawberries is going to go up. No, the cost of strawberries is going to go up, but now the cost of our medical taxes are going to go down.
Right. The net cost, and this is a really important point that I think a lot of people missed in recent years with the medical debate. Before Obamacare, we already had socialized medicine, and I'm not saying I'm a fan of the Affordable Care Act, but my dad is a physician, by the way. But the reason I bring that up is he's like, listen, we don't deny. He used to work in very poor areas in California. And he would say, we don't deny. I would get called in at 3 a.m. to do an appendectomy, life-saving procedure, and I would know I wasn't getting paid for it. And he's like, sometimes the hospital would get reimbursed for these things and the doctors would get reimbursed for them. But we had socialized medicine because if you went into the emergency room, they would not deny you service, right? They would not say, hey, you have to prove that you're going to be able to pay for this gallbladder or appendectomy or some other life-saving surgery before we actually know. They call the doctor, you have an operating room and here we go. So, and the hospitals would, of course, maybe the doctors didn't get reimbursed, but the hospitals certainly were getting reimbursed for their use of the operating room facilities. So the idea that it's requiring the employer to pay for medical insurance is going to increase the cost to you is a very, as you're pointing out, that's just a one-dimensional view because you're already paying for increased cost of strawberries. You're just not paying it when you purchase the strawberry. You're paying it in your taxes and everywhere else.
Bingo. I'll go real quickly on the other ones.
You don't even have to go quickly. I'm not in a rush. I just didn't want to be rude and take too much of your time.
My bills, I'm pretty ambitious on this. Obviously, I said I'm leaning this really hard. Probably bit off on more than I can chew, but that's fine. I'm used to doing that my whole life. But the central bank digital currency, I'm working with Scott Grow. He's the senator in this district. We're going after that. That'll go through. And what that is, it's a bill. And I did an article that went to Epic Times that this digital currency is what the Chinese do. It is the biggest component of surveillance and oppression you can possibly imagine. When they have everything you do is basically has a footprint on everything. I did a Second Amendment bill last session. You couldn't use credit cards and then track credit card codes because it was tracking Second Amendment behavior. Well, it doesn't matter. That bill will be irrelevant when you have digital currency because they know exactly what you're buying, where you're buying it, where you're going, where you're at. They can surveil you and they can go ahead and penalize you if you don't behave properly. In China, well, they do not. Your score good enough to get a loan. What loan rate you'll get depends on your score. You bought too much whiskey here or too much of this or too many weapons or whatever. It is the biggest oppressive surveillance thing you can possibly imagine. It terrifies me. And it's really going to be a problem to shut down.
Okay. I really want to talk to you about this. But for the naysayers that are saying, hey, the United States is not going to have like a social behavior credit score that's going to affect your capacity to get loans. Why do you think Budweiser is in the problem it is? Why do you think Ford released a commercial with a Ford Raptor that goes through the mud and then all of a sudden it's painted rainbow? Like how many, like from a marketing and business standpoint, how much do you think Ford was like, I know, we're missing this huge portion of the population. We better paint one of our trucks rainbow. And that will actually be a net positive to our sales because there's this giant portion of people that have to see a rainbow. It's like that's not the world. From a business standpoint, your ESG, I believe it's your ESG score, that's already affecting massive multinational companies and this is how they're behaving in society. This is how they're marketing themselves and branding themselves. And it is directly affecting their capacity to do business because if they have a bad social score, and again, this is like Anheuser-Busch, this is Ford Motor Companies. If the social manipulation string pullers can get Ford Motor Company to make a rainbow Ford Raptor, you think they can't mess with Matt Todd or Ted Hill? I guarantee they can't. So what you're talking about, this digital currency, what is the bill that you're talking about? Specifically, what is it doing? Is it saying that digital currencies will not be allowed by the state of Idaho, or what? Okay, explain this to me.
And what does that mean? It says it will not be recognized as currency in Idaho. What does that mean, really? It's a gesture. Hopefully, get a lot of states unite, but it's a gesture because if the federal government says, well, if you want your Social Security check, it's going to come in digital currency. You can refuse or not. What are you going to do? You're going to roll over and you're going to take it. They own you. That's the problem. They have the leverage on this. All they have to do, I have a military retirement. You want military retirement? If you don't want to trust, okay, I guess you don't get your retirement. It's your problem. They have us. They got us by the throat. And trying to stop this is going to be really a challenge. This is an ESG thing because Julie Ellsworth, she is the treasurer. She pulled us into this because this is an issue. One state, as like North Dakota actually has, or South Dakota, they had their own central bank in the state. Well, that's a huge step. Or you go into Bitcoin. And that was an alternative. I went, ooh, Bitcoin,
yeah, you and me. I had a crypto guy on a few months back, and by the end of the conversation, I'm like, you haven't convinced me. And you had an hour and a half, and I'm not an idiot. You still didn't explain it.
I don't think people are going to buy on this, but
right.
But the social score in China, we have already done this we're a cashless society already. They already kind of can track a lot of stuff what we're doing anyway. They know where we're at. They can surveil us. They're not supposed to, but what I learned with the credit card companies in my Second Amendment bill, that there was a group of senators and representatives that said, we want you to track these codes, because we're going to stop trafficking and illegal gun and ammo purchases, which is all garbage because criminals don't use credit cards. So it was a full surveillance mechanism that was mandated by the hardcore anti-gun lobby out of Congress. We shut that down. I was really happy with that. We put that out, and the banks pushed back against me hard. And I said, if you do this and you're surveilling this, the penalties are $10,000 per transaction. And then they just went, whoa, what do you mean 10,000? So you better not do it. And well, that's too much. Well, you better not do it.
Yeah,
so
just don't do it.
And then guess what? They rolled back. The credit cards companies backed out. It's over. So that worked. We shut that down because we were the first state to do it. I copied Florida. That's when I saw it, but we got ours across the line before they did, because we get stuff down here. We have we got that across the line, but it made the difference, and we were leaders on that to get that, stop that. But the digital currency will smoke that out of the water. They can do everything. They can surveil you and monitor you and prevent you. They even said, well, you know what? If it gets to be the point where you have too much in your 401k, can they redistribute that? Well, it's all in digital currency controlled by the central bank. Someone said that to me, and I went, what? Really? Oh, that'll never happen. No. Well, okay. It's scary, the thought of it. The surveillance mechanism in China is complete, from the cameras to the digital currency. They know exactly what you're doing. Would that ever happen to us? I think we'd be naive to say that we could not. That's why you have to push back. People are freaked out about it. They should be. I think it's a huge threat for our freedom. One of the biggest threats I've seen.
Right. And again, we all know the risk of carrying around a cell phone, right? And you put all of your financial transactions out there. That's going to be a huge risk as well. And I did have an argument with somebody who, it sent me some video, and it was like, all this real intense, I don't want to say conspiracy theory, but theory stuff about the different mechanisms in place and or things coming down the pipe. And I referenced the credit card thing. I was like, buddy, how many things do you do with cash, right? Because not many. I mean, we use Venmo, we use PayPal, we use Zelle, we use credit cards. These are all things that are already pulling data. Why do you think when you use Venmo, you have like a feed of information of where, the connections you have, the money they're exchanging, all those, like, do you think they're just showing you this just for fun? Like they're obviously tracking who's putting money where. So my point was, if you think that this is something that's coming in the future. It's already here to a certain degree.
Yes.
And we're participating in it. And I'm not saying we should. I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying that we should give up further control over our privacy, not in the least. But what I am saying is, if you think this is something coming for years in the future, you've already missed the boat. It's already here, right? And if you're concerned about it, there are steps you can take to, negate it or reduce it. But it's here, and we're just too comfortable with it because we see that, the Venmo icon on our cell phones. We're like, oh, Venmo, no problem. Send him $20, right? Give him pay my buddy back for drinks or something. So your bill would essentially make it illegal within the state of Idaho.
Yeah. And it's honestly, it is a gesture to hopefully get unity across all the states that we can push back. Gotcha. If it's a lot of states don't, it's just pushing back against this flood. I'm worried about it eventually coming our way, but if all the states align, we might have a chance to push this back. I hope.
Gotcha. Okay, so the immigration bill, the E-Verify, the digital currency prohibited. What else?
Cybersecurity, and I just got back from the Idaho National Lab. And I told you that I was a Chinese expert because I was an opposing force commander where I would apply all the forces of everything you can imagine against a war. So there'd be a large force exercise, aircraft carriers and stuff, and I would have a certain amount of ships, submarines, airplanes, space attack, cyber attack, and electronic attack I could apply to the force on the American side. So I understand the fight really, really well. Spent the last 15 years of my Navy career doing this. So I understand all these components. So I'm basically following up on what I'm an expert on, or used to be at least to some level. Went out there and got the brief yesterday, 6 hours of intel briefs and stuff on cybersecurity and the threat. Cybersecurity is a huge threat for Idaho. So we think about the war in Taiwan, but there's a phased approach in this war. Phase one is going to be, okay, what's going to happen? They can disrupt banking. They can make it so your bank cards don't work. So can you imagine that? Cashless society, bank cards don't work. Chaos. There's multi-tiered penetration points where they can get you to the point where they take away infrastructure. That is when you get into later phases of war. If we go to full war, and this is what, I right now, I fly as a contract fighter pilot down with Top Gun down in Fallon. I just did this 2 days ago and got a brief from those guys. They think this fight's coming in 24 to 25. We're going to fight China. Something's going to happen. Everyone's prepared for it. So this is where I get urgent. And people were wondering why I was so urgent on these China bills I did before. This cybersecurity thing is even more urgent because your cybersecurity posture has to be in place. You can't react. You have to be prepared. We are behind. We're behind by thousands of workers here. There's a lot of vulnerabilities, or I'm aware of, and the component of the infrastructure.
Right, so like Idaho Power Company, like the Department of Energy kind of vulnerability.
You don't even want to even talk. I grew up under the war of mutual assured destruction. If you have a cybersecurity attack that takes out the infrastructure and takes out the power grid, that's essentially the same thing. You take out the Western grid. There's 3 grids in the United States, Western, Eastern, and Texas. You take the Western out, and it goes down. How do you replace it? Because you don't have any communication to repair it. And there's nobody to help you. They theoretically can throw you into the 19th century with no recovery. The worst case scenario, that's the worst case scenario. But you have just components. Say if the Treasure Valley lost power for a month, can you imagine what that would do? Can you imagine the chaos and the people couldn't get their drugs and you couldn't power anything and you couldn't get any food? Everything stops. People have to understand there's a cascading impact. You can't farm anymore. You can't distribute anymore. There's no fuel being distributed. Nothing's communicated. Everyone's on cell phones. No one has radios anymore. How are you going to find out what's going on? How are you going to communicate this? How are you going to get a hold of the power guy that's going to come help you fix this transformer that got blown up by a cyber attack? How are you going to coordinate that? We have to get a new one that's across the country. How are you going to coordinate that? You see the challenges. It's just terrifying. You don't want to go there. The only way is that is literally the worst case scenario. But if you take it, okay, let's ramp it back a little bit, and you do it localized, it could still be very disruptive and very impactful. So we want to be prepared, and we are not. And it's this, the federal level's doing this, but the state has responsibility in this. And we are trying, I'm going to look at it as a state component cybersecurity coordination center. They do it nationally, but you need to take responsibility for your local grid, your local structures, which no one is doing now. Now, INL is aware of it. It requires coordination. It requires action, proactive action. People like to respond. Cybersecurity is a proactive preparation. It's not a war where, oh, we can start building stuff and recover. No, it's over. When they take this down and they blow up your high voltage transformers and you can't replace those and you can't reconfigure, you're basically done. So there's so many things that need to be done. We're so naive and we've just gotten ourselves into this box. And this is the way I would define it, because it is a battle space domain. When I talk about domains of war, and what I would say to the people, we have an Army Guard, an Air Guard, we need a Cyber Guard. Literally like a force this is the domain of the battle. We're not going to be facing tanks and guys with guns. We're facing this cyber battle. That's the domain of this battle space we have to respond to. So we need to get a force responsive, getting out there, getting on top of this threat, evaluating ourselves. And what the cybersecurity bill, the initial phase is to get a fusion center, a collaboration center that can bring all these resources to tell people, you need to fix this, you need to fix that. We're going to come after and check this and start to bring this together where these vulnerabilities, people don't even know they have.
Right. You can shore them up, start plugging the holes.
It needs to happen now. I get excited about this because I did this notionally where I got to actually, we don't really shoot real missiles, but we would theoretically, I knew how to win. And when you take the resource and you take away the mobility back in the States, they take away our mobility, we can't sustain the logistics of this fight. China's going to want to take out your ports, take out your fuel supplies, take out the disruption. No one's going to be paying attention to the ports because they're trying to feed, protect their family. The fight ends. They win the war because we can't answer it. The destroyers come out there, run out of weapons, come back. There's no fuel. Nothing's waiting for them. They can't get in the port, whatever. This kind of battle's different than what people are used to. It is multi-domain, space attack, undersea attack. There's traditional stuff with ships and airplanes. I was a fighter pilot. I fought this battle and watched this battle progress to be absolutely overwhelmingly difficult. And it's going to be a heck of a fight. We can win. We don't want to fight this fight. Understand, if it comes down to an early phase disruption, they could just blockade the South China Sea and turn our economy upside down. If they decide to do that, Walmart shuts down, no more semiconductors. We can't build Ford trucks. We can't build anything. You talk about a supply chain disruption, you have no idea. The Dow will go down 80% because no one's going to be building anything until we reconfigure our supply chain. 90% plus of all rare earth materials for building anything along the batteries or in electrical vehicles or those windmills comes from China and Russia. 95% of semiconductors, their high-end semiconductors, comes from Taiwan and South Korea. So you stop that. Then all the other stuff that comes out of there. So yeah, will China suffer? Yes. Will we suffer? Profusely, because we developed this dependency. I get so frustrated and angry about it. We sold all our capabilities. We don't have any mines over here. We don't have enough copper mines to even fill that demand. We can't even, and rare earth materials, forget it. Some key elements that are strategic and required for weapons, we don't have enough to do and build the weapons here. We're dependent on overseas resources. So we need to open 360 mines just to meet the demand of what it would require for us to be autonomous building these vehicles and things. So we're not even close. So you look at this this industrial chasm that we've developed. We're extremely vulnerable, and it's our fault. We basically sold our capability overseas, and now we're wallowing in it. And now we don't have the power to say, China, I don't care what you do. We're just go ahead, boycott it, but we can't do that.
Do you think that that COVID actually opened a lot of people's eyes to this, because I have a friend who works for way up at EY, and he was saying in late 2020, he's like, you have no idea, Matt. We are the companies we work for are rerouting. They are rethinking everything. And I was thinking, buddy, why? Right? Like, there's going to be a vaccine soon, but that's before I knew anything about the vaccine. Like, we'll get through this in 6 months or 12 months or something. Why change? It's like, because they don't want to ever be vulnerable and dependent on these other companies. If there's another thing like a pandemic, or if these other countries decide to manipulate the markets and start crushing companies, because as you're pointing out, turn off the faucet of one material, turn off the faucet of one item. I mean, we all saw what happened to vehicle production. You all of them waiting for key components, just sitting there on in these massive parking lots. None of them functional because we needed one thing. Right. So do you think that there is actually an acknowledgement coming out of COVID that, like, oh, this is a massive problem and people are taking steps, or do you think that it's not really being addressed to the degree that it should be?
I would say they had the CHIP Act came out. That is actually under Biden. He came up with that. That was to bring the chip manufacturing back to the United States. But that's going to take years.
Right.
So we're not
right. In the near term, it's a real problem.
It's a real problem because I don't even know how bad it will be. We got, again, if this happens, they boycott and it's an early phase. They might, isolate Micron Technology and some of the other plants and with localized impact, and we won't be able to even meet those chips. That's not enough to answer all the requirements, especially the high-end chips. A big chunk of them are made over in Taiwan. How did we let that happen? I think it's criminal. Literally, the companies that allow that to happen, because Raytheon is a weapons company. We don't we don't put Raytheon companies over in Taiwan. So some industries like the mining, these are strategic elements that we just blew off. Oil, we saw the impact of that. Well, we got that. We have to. We got enough oil. We can do it. We don't have enough uranium if you want to go into nuclear, but we don't have the mining to even fill our industries. So you shut off this pipeline from overseas. All these materials come from overseas. We can't do anything. We have some iron ore, but I got the word. We don't have enough copper, let alone anything else. Copper, what happens to all these big copper? They shut them all down. I went on a mining tour here and I found out how hard it is to open a mine. It takes 10 years. In Australia, it takes 5 years. If it was a crisis and hey, forget about the rules. Open these mines. That's what literally would take a National Defense Authorization Act or something. But again, that takes too long. We're already we're over the barrel. We're so vulnerable, and it angers me that we got ourselves, because warfare is a combination of diplomacy, economic power, and military power. So diplomacy basically depends on what power you have economically and militarily. Militarily, we got some power. Economically, we do not. They can literally hijack us, and they know it. Now, will they suffer? Yeah, but they have a totalitarian government. They just have to tell their people, America's doing this to you. It's their fault. And then they can mobilize their people against it. That's the danger. And the biggest danger about this fight is that vulnerability. Why do we care that much about Taiwan? Well, that's why. It's like we had the fight over oil. This is the fight over the 70% of all commerce goes through the South China Sea. If we retreat out of the Western Pacific, China will control the world. And if we don't have freedom of the seas, they'll take over Singapore and all the paths that come through there, and all those economies from Korea and Japan and Australia will be cut off. The world will change. And obviously, we see the threat, America's declining empire. Well, they will come up and be the empire, and we're going to be something different. It'll be something different that we probably won't like. I would guarantee you the Japanese and the Filipinos and everyone else in the Western Pacific won't like it, because the Chinese are not going to be friendly about it. They're going to come down and do whatever they want.
Man, such a part of me wants to be like, that couldn't happen. But then I remember, didn't they just take over Las Vegas? When you're talking about digital currency and reliance on technology, it's like they took Las Vegas and held them ransom for millions and millions of dollars. It's like, if you if you think about the security in Las Vegas and what it would take to hack, these massive casinos for millions and millions of dollars, like, why couldn't they take out an energy grid? Like,
Absolutely.
Why couldn't they go after a utility company?
Well, I already know they can, and I got the top secret briefs, but yes, capabilities and so forth, specifics, to talk about. Yes, this could be this way. Now, is this the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is that's the worst case scenario. You want to have an insurance policy never to get there. I have never been in Iraq, but I've been paying insurance for 40 years, never been in Iraq. It's kind of like that. Just prepare for that one time. If it's a component less than that, disrupt the banking. You don't want that. Can you imagine shutting down the cell phone towers for 4 to 5 days? It would fall apart. So you don't want any of that to happen. And it can escalate into this. Now, if this war gets going, and this is when it gets to be unknown. If we're winning and they retreat, we save Taiwan, thousands of Americans are going to die. All my fighter pilot friends are going to die. We all know it. It's going to be a war of attrition, and it's going to be bloody, and it'll be ugly. It's a bad war. Maritime wars are very bloody and decisive. You go throughout history, they always are bad. 10,000 people die in a day. So you have aircraft carriers with 5,500 people. You're going to sink an aircraft carrier. Possibly. It's hard to sink one. You're going to take one out of action. You got destroyers with 350 people on. You got all these guys in airplanes coming out there fighting this fight. I've seen it. We exercise it. It's tough. It's really, really tough to defend Taiwan. It takes a lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of resources for us to do this, and we will bleed profusely. And I'm retired. And I said, well, I'm not really retired because this war starts. I'll be back in it some way. I guarantee it. If it happened in the next year, I'm still connected where I would put my uniform on and go down and help them get some airplanes out of the boneyards because we're going to run out of airplanes. I will be involved somehow because I'll volunteer. I'll show up. I'll get my stuff on and go down there and help them and get these airplanes going because we're going to run out of airplanes. And everyone says, Lurch, call sign Lurch. That's not going to happen. Oh, yeah, I saw it happen in exercises over and over. We practiced it. We did the numbers. Oh, yeah. If we fight this fight, and people have done it in different virtual scenarios, yeah, the guys have seen it. They've seen the outcome. I got a bunch of buddies, ex-admirals. They told me, you're right, Lurch, this is going to be bad. This is going to really be bloody, and this is going to be hard. But we can win. And the Chinese know that. That's why they haven't done it yet. And I think we're getting better at it now. We got some stuff. We can win this fight, and we're getting better and better and better. We're getting the right weapons, and I think we're ready to fight that. Hopefully they will, maybe China will fall apart, and then this problem will be solved. We've been hoping for that for the last 20 years. That would solve the problem. Xi falls, they have a coup, they have a civil war, and we just sit back and watch.
Yeah, but if they fall, all of the problems with supply chain come tumbling down too.
Exactly. So nothing really works out very well.
Listen, man, you have me thoroughly horrified.
Well, everyone knows. When I was Captain Hill, but I give these briefs, and I did this. You don't want to hear Captain Hill's brief. He will put you in the dirt.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't want to not hear it.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's really easy for people to just get overwhelmed with gloom and doom and problems. One of the first real serious interviews I did years back was with this guy running for city council in this town in California. And we're about an hour and a half into the interview. I'm a younger guy. I don't know all the issues. And, I'm happy to be talking to him. We're going on. And he said, it was like, and that's why we'd only have about 8 hours of water. I was like, what?
What?
He said, well, there are a lot of wildfires around here. And if the wildfires blow through and kill our electric grid, we only have enough water in the towers for about 8 hours. And if you consider the fires blowing through the area, the fire trucks aren't going to be able to pump anything because there's not going to be any water pressure. So I'm working on generators. And I was like, you're working on what? And he just went on to explain. He said, well, look, we want these backup generators. We want to have about 3 days worth of water. And, in the event that fire blows through, we can fight the fire and get on with it. And that was the first time as an adult I really realized the vulnerabilities aren't hypothetical, and they're not things to be taken lightly. And the local people in charge of the city and in charge of the municipalities, they have real life or death power in their hands. And yeah, this guy could have just come in and talk about nothing for a while, and here young Matt wouldn't really know what to ask about. But he did offer this little thing, and it changed my perspective on when I was talking to people of real consequence. What they're doing, the things that the general populace doesn't understand, is that there are real life and death problems right here, right now. I went to an HOA meeting about a year or two ago, and they'd put up these phone lines, and we have our own water system here. And I was asking them, how much water do we have? They're like, oh, no, we can pump tons of water. I'm like, how much water do we have if the power goes out? I'm like, what? And I'm like, if the power goes, he's like, if there's fires, like, forget the fire. Power's out. No more power. Will water come through my faucet? And the guy kind of scrambled, and he's like, okay, we have 48 hours worth of water. And everybody in the room kind of paused for a second. We're like, so if the power goes out, if there's a fire, if there's an emergency, if the grid goes down, the people living in this development will only have water for 48 hours. Think about that. You're talking about fuel. You're talking about cell phones. You're talking about food. I'm like, forget the food. We have food for a month. Easy. You got some rice. You got some beans. I'm a big rice and beans guy. How much water do you have? And if that goes out, I don't care about anything. It's over. You got 3 days from the time your tap stops. And if you don't have enough and by the way, if you have some, don't tell anyone about it. And nobody's going to worry about your cell phone. Nobody's going to worry about your car. They're going to try to find out who has potable water. And that's it. And man, that concept changed me.
Spot on. See, it's the real. If you take yourself off this gleeful life we live, we never suffer, and you kind of things can go bad. We just haven't ever had to. No one suffered at all in this country. We haven't been through a war. We didn't get blown up like Europe. We haven't really suffered through anything significant. A recession. Ooh, we have not suffered. So it's easy to be very comfortable and as peaceful and nothing's going to happen. That wasn't for my ancestors 150 years ago. They routinely got hammered for different reasons. Right. But we live a pretty cushy, comfortable life, and everything works. So it's easy to become complacent. So no one wants to hear that. You just told me that water thing made me think about it. I thought I was aware of all the badness, and I go, uh-oh.
Oh, it horrifies me.
I don't have that figured out.
I like the solar flares, the whole thing with the power grid. I'm not even worried about the power. I'm worried about getting water in the next 72 hours because I have 3 kids, and if I have to see them without water, I will do anything to get them water. It's a thing. Ted, thank you so much for coming. My goodness.
Yeah. Well, I said. I got a list that's even longer, and we can stop.
Listen, let's do this. Let's put a pin in this. You're going to come back. We're going to keep going.
Yeah, because, again, I probably buried this thing into the dirt. But.
You didn't. No. You absolutely didn't. But, I think there's only so much people can absorb in one conversation. Thank you for making the time today. Thank you for everything you're doing. And Absolutely. Thank you for all the stuff that you can't even tell us about, because I know like a lot of people, there are things happening behind the lines that we'll never know about that we owe you credit for. So thank you for that, too.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And a quick shout out to our partner with these episodes, New Gen Wellness Center. This is a facility focused on mental and physical wellness. They have lots of crisis stabilization programs, detox facilities. They don't believe that medication is always the answer. They focus extensively on an integrative approach to mental and physical well-being. They're fantastic. If you know somebody struggling, needing help with substance abuse, detox, any kind of mental health, reach out to New Gen Wellness Center. That's newgenwellnesscenter.com.